It was supposed to be a routine first day at my new job as a night security guard at the old Hawthorne Manor, an expansive mansion that had been converted into a museum. I arrived before dusk, excitement bubbling in my chest as I stepped through the grand entrance. The air was musty, thick with the weight of forgotten stories and time-worn secrets. Little did I know, I was about to become part of one. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I made my rounds, flashlight in hand, illuminating the faded portraits that lined the walls. Each face seemed to follow me, their eyes glinting with an unsettling awareness. There was something about the silence that felt alive, as if the very walls whispered secrets meant only for me. I brushed off the feeling, chalking it up to my imagination. Around midnight, as the moon cast an eerie glow through the ornate windows, I heard it. A soft tapping, rhythmic and persistent, echoing from the upper floor. My heart raced, adrenaline surging through my veins. I hesitated only for a moment before deciding to investigate. After all, I was the guard. The staircase creaked ominously beneath my feet as I ascended, each step sending shivers down my spine. The tapping grew louder, now accompanied by a low, almost imperceptible whisper that chilled me to the bone. Help. Me it called, a haunting plea that sent my instincts into overdrive. I reached the second floor, where the tapping originated from a room at the end of the dimly lit corridor. The door stood ajar, swaying slightly as if inviting me in. I pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest, and was met with a sight that made my blood run cold. In the center of the room, a child sat on the floor, her back to me, tapping a small wooden toy against the floor. Her long hair hung in disheveled strands, cloaking her face in shadow. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She paused, the tapping stopping abruptly, and slowly turned to face me. Her eyes were hollow, voids that seemed to draw in the light, and her mouth twisted into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I've been waiting for you," she said, her voice echoing like the whispers of the mansion. "Will you help me?" I stumbled backward, the realization dawning on me that this was no ordinary child. Before I could react, she stood, her form shifting unnaturally, her small fingers elongating into claw-like appendages. Panic surged, and I instinctively turned to run, but the door slammed shut with an unnatural force, trapping me inside. As I frantically searched for an escape, the whispers grew louder, morphing into a cacophony of anguished cries. Shadows danced along the walls, morphing into ghostly figures, each one bearing a resemblance to the portraits below. They surrounded me, their faces twisted in despair, echoing stories of sorrow and vengeance. I turned back to the girl, now fully transformed, her true form a grotesque blend of childlike innocence and nightmarish horror. "You can't leave," she said, her voice a chilling melody. "You are part of the manor now." The realization hit me like a freight train. I wasn't the first night guard to be lured into the mansion's grasp. The stories of those who had vanished, forgotten in time, flooded my mind. I was trapped in a web of malevolence, a pawn in the manor's dark history. With every ounce of strength, I lunged for the door, but the shadows closed in around me, their icy fingers grasping at my limbs. As I screamed for help, the walls echoed my cries, a twisted symphony of despair. I felt myself slipping away, consciousness fading, as I became another whisper in the dark, another story woven into the fabric of Hawthorne Manor. And on quiet nights, when the moon shines just right, visitors can still hear the faint tapping of a child's toy echoing through the halls, accompanied by the soft cries of a guard lost to time, forever haunting the mansion he once thought was merely a job. The sun dipped beneath the horizon as I pulled up to the old Victorian house that would soon be my workplace. As a new night clerk at the local inn, I was excited yet anxious. The place had a creepy reputation among the townsfolk, but I brushed it off after all. I loved a good ghost story. What could possibly go wrong during a quiet shift, right? I stepped inside, greeted by the scent of polished wood and aged wallpaper. The inn's decor was charming in an eerie kind of way, with flickering candlelight casting long shadows on the walls. The owner, Mrs. Caldwell, explained the basic procedures and handed me a set of keys, her eyes lingering on me a second too long. "Just remember to keep the doors locked at night," she warned, her voice barely above a whisper. You never know who or what might come knocking. As the clock struck midnight, I settled behind the front desk, the silence wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. The occasional creak of the old building seemed amplified in the stillness. I glanced at the guest book, filled with signatures from travelers long gone. But one name caught my eye, a guest who had checked in exactly 50 years ago, never to check out. My heart raced, but I forced myself to laugh it off. It was just a coincidence, I told myself. A sharp knock echoed through the lobby, making me jump. I hesitated before opening the door, only to find no one there. My pulse quickened as I scanned the dimly lit porch. Just the wind, I muttered, trying to convince myself. But deep down, a creeping unease began to settle in. The night wore on and I distracted myself with social media on my phone. But then, the lights flickered and the temperature in the room dropped suddenly. I shivered, and just as I was about to dismiss it, I heard a whisper, a soft, chilling voice that seemed to come from nowhere. "Help me. Please." I shot up from my chair, heart pounding. The voice echoed in my mind as I raced towards the source of the sound, following it down a narrow, dark hallway. The walls seemed to close in around me, and I could feel my breath quickening. I reached a door at the end of the hall, its surface old and splintered. As I reached for the knob, it swung open on its own, revealing a pitch-black room. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The only response was a cold gust of air that rushed past me, extinguishing the light in the hallway behind me. Panic surged in my chest as I felt the door slam shut, trapping me inside. I fumbled for my phone, praying the light would guide me. As I turned it on, the beam illuminated an old bed, draped in dusty sheets. But it wasn't the furniture that froze me in place, it was the figure lying beneath the covers. A frail hand reached out towards me, fingers gnarled and pale. "Help me," it pleaded again, the voice unmistakably that of the guest from the guest book. I stumbled back, my heart racing. "Who are you?" I demanded, but the figure merely stared, eyes hollow and filled with despair. Suddenly, the room filled with whispers, voices overlapping, growing louder and more frantic. "You must help us," they cried in unison, each cry echoing in my mind, drowning out my thoughts. I rushed to the door, desperate to escape, but it wouldn't budge. The air grew thick around me, heavy with a suffocating presence. In a moment of sheer terror, I closed my eyes and screamed, as the whispers swirled around me like a tornado. When I opened them again, I found myself back at the front desk, as if none of it had happened. Shaking, I looked at the clock. Only 10 minutes had passed. But something felt different. I glanced at the guest book, and my blood ran cold. Now, the name of the last guest was scrawled in bold letters, my own signature joining the ranks of those who had come before me. I was trapped in this haunted cycle, destined to answer the whispers for eternity. The front door rattled again, and I knew, deep down, that the next guest had arrived, drawn by the stories of old. As I prepared to greet them, my heart sank. I was no longer the clerk, I was just another lost soul in the inn, willing but unable to escape the horror that awaited within. It was supposed to be a routine first day at the new job, just a humble night shift at the old Crestwood Asylum, a place notorious for its history, but recently repurposed as a rehabilitation center for troubled teens. The moment I stepped through the heavy iron gates, a chill ran down my spine, but I brushed it off as first-day nerves. My supervisor, a weary-looking man named Mr. Hawthorne, gave me a brief tour, his voice low and gravelly as he explained the layout. "Just keep your eyes on the patients, especially at night." There. Sensitive, I couldn't help but notice the way his eyes darted toward the shadows, as if he were expecting something to emerge from them. But I giggled inwardly, dismissing his warnings as mere superstitions. As dusk settled, the fluorescent lights flickered to life, casting eerie shadows in the long hallways. The first hour was uneventful, checking in on patients, making sure they were settled, and ensuring no one wandered where they shouldn't. But as the clock struck midnight, something shifted in the air, a heavy silence swallowed the building. I paused outside the door to room 13, a notorious spot. Rumor had it that a violent incident had occurred there years ago, but I was determined to face my fears. As I approached, I noticed the door was slightly ajar, creaking softly as if beckoning me closer. I pushed it open, and my heart raced as I stepped inside. The room was empty, save for a single bed in the corner, the sheets unmade and stained. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the room, extinguishing the flickering light above. I fumbled for the switch, but my fingers trembled, the darkness swallowing me whole. That's when I heard it, a soft, melodic humming coming from the far end of the room. Against my better judgment, I stumbled toward the sound, the hairs on my neck standing on end. As I drew closer, I could see the faint outline of a figure, a girl, sitting cross-legged on the floor, her back to me. Her long hair cascaded over her shoulders, and she seemed so engrossed in her humming that she didn't notice me. "Hey," I whispered, trying to sound brave. "Are you okay?" The humming stopped, and the girl slowly turned her head to face me. Her eyes were sunken, void of color, and her smile was wide, too wide. "They don't like it when you come in here," she said in a sing-song voice. "But I like to play." Before I could react, the door slammed shut behind me, and the girl jumped to her feet, her expression morphing from playful to menacing in an instant. "You shouldn't have come." "Now, they'll want to play with you too." Panic surged through me as I scrambled to the door, but it wouldn't budge. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to thicken, morphing into dark figures that loomed closer. Their whispers filling the air with a cacophony of voices I couldn't understand. "Welcome to your first day," they hissed in unison, their breath cold against my skin. "Let's play forever." I felt the cold grip of despair as I realized I was trapped in a nightmare far worse than I had imagined. The legends of Crestwood Asylum were true, and now I was bound to become just another whisper in its haunted halls. With a final, desperate scream, I lunged for the door, determined to escape the darkness only to find myself standing back in the entrance, as if nothing had happened. But as I looked around, the faces of my coworkers had changed. They wore the same wide, chilling smiles as the girl. I was still in the asylum, but now they were waiting for me to join their twisted game. I was no longer just a newcomer, I was part of the horror that lurked within, and the real nightmare was just beginning.